Aloha. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about while versus for loops. So we've gone through both of them, and each of them have their own good points and bad points. While, in my opinion, has a lot more bad points than good points, but we'll go ahead and talk about the differences in the two. And I've kind of written it up as a summary in VS Code here. So let's go ahead and share screens. So while versus for loops, both of them can count a specific number of loop iterations, but a for loop is best when you know how many iterations in advance. In other words, you have a finite number that you're going to do, you know how many in advance. For example, if you're going to iterate over every element in a container, a for loop is perfect. A while loop is better if you don't know how many iterations in advance you're going to be doing. For example, if you're going to let somebody input things until they put in a sentinel value of, let's say, 0 to exit out, in something like that, a while loop is going to be better. In general, though, you want to avoid the while loop because it has that nasty side effect of infinite loops. So we're going to try to avoid while loops when we can. I mentioned this in a previous video, but you normally can't make infinite loops with a for loop, but it is possible, actually. So I wanted to show you an example that I've come up with. It's an example that it's not the best example of coding, but it is something that can cause you to go into an infinite loop. So I thought you might want to see this. So I've constructed a list, and the list has 5 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we're going to start our loop over this list for item in the list. So each time we go through this loop, item is going to assume the value of each element here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But within this loop, I'm also going to append another item to that loop. So the first time we go through, we're going to have 1, we're going to print 1, then the list, we're going to append that item, which is 1 plus 1. So we'll append 2 towards the end. So this will become 2 at the end here. And when we go through with 2, we're going to add 1 to it, 3. So after that 2 at the end, we're going to append a 3. So we're always going to be growing larger. We're never going to get to the end of this. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And we'll just run it from up here. And let's clear the screen. So let's go ahead and run. And as you can see, we've got an infinite loop. We're always going further out, building this list longer and longer. So we can make an infinite loop, but why would you want to do that? It's not a good thing to do, but you really have to try hard in order to do that. But you know, this is something that can happen if you're trying to work on a list that you're already, if you're working on a list that you're looping through, you don't want to be introducing new elements, or you can inadvertently end up with an infinite loop. This is an uncommon thing, but it's something to be careful of. But in general, the point of this lesson is to go over the benefits of while versus for. In general, use for if you've got a specific number of iterations that you're going to make. If you're going over an iterable object like a container, like a list, tuple, string, something like that. And use the while loop when you don't know how many iterations are going to be needed in advance, like when you're getting input until they enter a certain sentinel value. So that's the lesson. This is one of the shorter ones. So go ahead and we'll see you in the next lesson.